Chapter 11 Cowboys Don't Cry by Marilyn Halvorson. Casey waved to me as I watched the bus roar on up to the hill. I turned and walked slowly towards the house. It had been another crazy day. I hadn't even had time to think. I was glad, because now that I did have time, I didn't like my thoughts much. I started wondering about Angel, and that started me remembering last night. I didn't know how much longer this Mexican standoff between Dad and me was going to last, but I did know it was like living under a high tension wire that could snap at any time. Then I noticed that Jeff's truck was in the yard, but this time Dad's was missing. This was starting out like an instant replay of last night, and that was one movie I did not want to see again. I went in the house and threw my books on a chair. Sure enough, there was another note on the table, this time in Jeff's writing. In town, buying gyros, grok, grub. Back soon. I couldn't help laughing. Now there would be a challenge for Miss Bradley. But even while I was laughing, I was half wondering if they'd heard there was a rodeo somewhere around. I also wondered where the grocery money was coming from. Probably Jeff. Dad hadn't worked any rodeos for a month, and clowns sure don't get holiday pay. The way I figured it, Dad must be about broke. Having our own place was great, but it didn't pay the bills. If Dad and I ever got to talking to each other again, maybe I'd find out what he was planning to do for money. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a thought that made grocery money seem like nothing crossed my mind. The vet bill. A job like that could easily be worth $100, and she wasn't done yet. I got a sick feeling in the bottom of my stomach, but I didn't have time to think about it anymore. I'd heard the Sutherlands van drive in. They hadn't wasted any time. I went out to meet them. "How's she doing?" Casey asked. "I don't know. I haven't had the time to look." The three of us walked out to the barn. Angel was too busy eating hay to give us more than a casual flick of her ears. "She really is better," Casey whispered. Mrs. Sutherland didn't say anything, and I couldn't read her face as she looked the horse over. Outside in the yard, a car door slammed, but I couldn't take my eyes off Angel as Mrs. Sutherland unwrapped the bandage on her leg. The lady sure could handle horses. Angel barely twitched as she sponged the wound out and rebandaged it. At last she wiped her hands and turned to look at me. At least I thought she was looking at me, but then I realized she was looking behind me. I turned and saw Dad and Jeff standing there. For a minute, nobody said anything, and all I could think of was those stupid lessons on manners they'd have in those old elementary school health books. "You're supposed to introduce the gentleman to the ladies first, I think." Gentlemen? Dad and Jeff? You gotta be kidding. But just when I get my mind made up for sure about something, I turn out to be wrong. This time the something was Dad. He was as sober as an owl and all cleaned up. He looked like everybody's idea of the gallant cowboy. He took his hat off and walked up to Casey's mother. "Ma'am, I'm Josh Morgan. The big fella under the hat is Jeff Burdett, and I guess you already know Shane." Before Mrs. Sutherland had a chance to answer, he went on. "I want to thank you for all you've done, taking the trouble to come down here so late last night, and for the fine job you've done of fixing this horse up. We really appreciate it." Mrs. Sutherland smiled. "That's my job," she said. But I could see she was impressed with Dad. I was too. I'd almost forgotten what a nice guy he could be sometimes. There was a long silence then. Everyone was waiting for the answer, but no one wanted to ask the question. Finally, Mrs. Sutherland answered it anyway. Well, I can't promise you a Kentucky Derby winner. There's a lot of muscle damage, and some of it could be permanent. She paused and then smiled as she went on. But barring any unforeseen complications, I think the least you can count on is a good, healthy brood mare. That was like one of those old gold good news, bad news jokes, only it wasn't funny. Being a brood mare wasn't the future I'd had in mind for a horse like Angel, and I didn't dare even think about how Dad would react to the idea. An electric silence hung in the air. Then Dad smiled, a slow, sad smile, as he said, "Considering the way things looked last night, that sounds real good." He was looking at me, not her, when he said that, but I couldn't read what was on his mind. Casey and I walked to their van together, and I could see she was dying to tell me something. As soon as we got out of hearing of the others, she said, "You didn't tell me your dad was that Josh Morgan." As far as I knew, I hadn't told her he was any Josh Morgan. Huh? I said. The champion bull rider. I sighed. That was a long time ago, Case. Ancient history. Yesterday is ancient history? Casey, I said patiently, what are you talking about? The paper's in the van. See for yourself. She opened the door and brought out today's Calgary paper, open to the sports section. There it was in big black letters. A comeback for Morgan. Spectators at yesterday's Cochrane Rodeo were in for a special treat. Former North American bull riding champion Josh Morgan demonstrated the style that has earned him the title twice. On a bull aptly named Amnesia, he won the event with almost unheard of score of 88 points. Morgan, who has not been riding for the past 2 or 3 years for what he terms personal reasons, is now making his home in southern Alberta. When asked why he picked Cochrane for a return to the sport, his reply was simple: it was handy. He refused comment on whether this was the beginning of a bid to regain the championship. I had to read it over twice before I could really take it in. So Dad had finally made that one big ride, the one he'd waited for so long. No wonder he'd come home singing last night. He hadn't given me the chance to be there to see it, and he'd even lied to me about where he was going. I still couldn't understand that part. Why did he have to lie to me? Because he thought he was somehow betraying me by going rodeoing one more time when he'd promised to settle down here? Or could he have been scared, afraid that he really was finished as a bull rider? Maybe he just couldn't take the chance of having me there to see him try one more time and fail. That would mean that what I thought mattered a lot more to him than I ever realized. Still, any way you cut it, the whole thing made me feel left out, as if Dad hadn't trusted me to share the greatest ride he'd ever made. I didn't know whether to be proud or to get mad all over again. Casey was waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't think of anything to say. Then Mrs. Sutherland came over, and I remembered I had to talk to her about something more important. Mrs. Sutherland. She closed the back doors, turned round. I didn't know exactly how I was going to say this, so I ended up blurting it out as fast as I could, the way I do oral reports in school. I know we're going to owe you a bunch of money, and, well, I don't think we've got much, and since all this was my fault anyhow, I was wondering if you could maybe hold the bill till the holidays start and I could find a job somewhere and get the money to pay you. Her eyes were smiling, but she kept the rest of her face serious when she answered, "That sounds like a reasonable enough request." She looked me over hard, then looked like she would study a horse she might buy. Then she made up her mind. But if you're really serious about a job, I've got one for you, starting Saturday morning at the clinic. Casey helps out Saturdays, but sometimes we get behind. You want it? Sure, I said, trying not to sound as relieved as I felt. Okay, see you at 9 on Saturday. Get in, Casey. I've got some chores to finish and you've got homework. Casey made a face. I can't wait, she muttered as she climbed in. Her mother started the engine and was already turning around when Casey stuck her head out the window. Hey, Shane, do you want to come to the school dance tomorrow night? That was the first I'd heard that there was one, but I didn't need to be asked twice. Sure, I said again. Then I noticed Casey's face. She'd turned bright red and looked like she wished she could disappear. I mean, she stammered, Mum's taking Barb and me, and she'll stop for you if you need a ride, that is. That was the first time I'd seen Casey when she wasn't in control of a situation. I was kind of glad to see that. I wasn't the only one who gets embarrassed, but I didn't really see what she had to be embarrassed about. I didn't mind going to the dance with her all that much. I stood there, watched the van disappear up the hill. It wasn't until I heard a noise behind me and turned around to see Dad and Jeff standing there that I realized I still had a big, stupid grin on my face. Well, at least you ain't got bad taste, Jeff said, and then it was my turn to get embarrassed. I looked at Dad. He didn't say anything. He didn't seem to be mad at me anymore, but it was hard to tell because he'd avoided looking me in the eye. I didn't understand what he was thinking at all. I wasn't sure it wasn't better when I at least knew he was mad. Then I remembered the newspaper article and I had to ask, did you really score an 88 at Cochrane, Dad? He did look at me when he answered, yeah, Shane, I really did. It was that ride I was always waiting for. He stopped for a minute and then added, so low I almost didn't hear. Too bad it had to come too late. I started to say, what do you mean, too late? You can still be a champ. But I didn't say it, because for once in his life Dad was seeing things like they really were. He was 36 years old. He had a kid to be responsible for, a ranch he couldn't leave, a drinking problem he couldn't drown, and a memory he couldn't bury. He was right. It was too late. Not too late to be a great bull rider, he'd proved that, but too late to be a champ again. I can't explain it exactly, but they're two different things. Then suddenly his face broke out into a 1,000-watt grin of his that makes it hard to believe there's a stormy side to Josh Morgan. But it was worth it, he said. I'd almost forgot how it felt to walk up there and pick up that first prize money. And the silver buckle. He pulled up his jacket so I could see it. It was a nice enough buckle, all right, but he must have had a dozen more like it, or better. Still, he seemed to be real proud of it, so I walked over and took a good look. That's great, Dad. It's a real nice buckle. I sounded as phony as a $3 bill, but I didn't know what to do about it. I just didn't know what Dad expected from me anymore. One minute he was acting like he wished I didn't exist. One minute he was acting like he wished I didn't exist. And the next he was wanting my approval for making a super ride. I didn't have a clue what part I was supposed to be playing anymore. But I hadn't seen anything yet. His next move was enough to leave me wondering what movie I was in, never mind which part. Oh, yeah, he said, with a kind of half proud, half embarrassed expression. I used some of that prize money to buy you something. He hesitated there, not seeming to know how I was going to react. Then he started opening the doors of Jeff's horse trailer. It's in here, he said. Of course, my first thought was that they really had bought a horse in Cochrane, but that didn't make any sense. Irresponsible as those two could be about some things, they'd never have left a horse standing in a trailer all that time. I was right. It wasn't a horse. It was a big, rugged Yamaha YZ 100, all bright red and white with its gold rims shining in the sun. I just stood there and didn't say a word. Maybe Dad thought I was too happy for words. I hope that's what he thought. The truth is, I was stunned. All I could hear was my brain ringing up numbers like a cash register. At first glance, I thought the bike was brand new, but now I could see it had some miles on it. But even secondhand, a bike like that must have cost him 5 or 600 anyway, some of the prize money. I'd have bet it was all the prize money and some more thrown in. I wondered if he'd been drunk when he bought it. I almost hoped so. The only alternative was that he was crazy. He didn't have a job. He didn't have any prospects of getting a job. We were so close to broke, I could almost hear the wolf scratching at the door, and he happened to pick up a little money he had been counting on. He hadn't been counting on. So what did he do? Put it in the bank? Buy groceries or something far out like that? No, he went and bought me a motorcycle. I didn't even know if I wanted a motorcycle. The whole idea was so far out of the question that I've never even thought about it before. One thing I did know for sure, if I had to pick between eating 3 meals a day or owning a motorcycle, eating would have won, hands down. But unfortunately, Dad didn't seem to see it that way. He'd missed a few other little details too, such as the fact that it wasn't legal for me to even ride a bike like this for another 2 years. But none of that made any difference now, because, like it or not, I had the bike. It was sitting there in the cold, hard metal, and I had to say something. But what? How about it? It's very nice, but I'm afraid you'll have to take it back. That's what I wanted to say, but I knew I couldn't. It was crazy. After the way Dad had acted last night when he saw Angel, I'd thought that he hated my guts, that nothing would ever make him forgive me for letting Mum's horse get worse. Now, something in his face gave me the weirdest feeling that suddenly he and I had switched places, and he was a kid trying to win my approval any way he could. Was this his way of trying to say he was sorry about all the times when I needed him and he wasn't there? So why couldn't he just talk to me, tell me how he felt? Did he think he could buy me a bike and that would wipe out all the bad times? I didn't need a bike. I needed a father, but I couldn't say that. I couldn't tell him how I felt any better than he could tell me. So it looked like I was going to have a bike. I grinned a big frozen grin and managed to say, "It's beautiful, Dad. I just can't believe you really got it for me." And I wasn't lying about that. That broke the tension, and suddenly Dad and Jeff were all over that machine, playing with it like kids with a new toy. They got so carried away they almost forgot all about me, so I didn't have to keep up my excited look any longer. But I guess I'd have to admit that by the time I actually got the chance to get on that bike and tear down the road with the wind in my face and the trees flashing past a blur and the chrome flashing in the sun and that big engine roaring, loving that machine had stopped being just an act. Whatever mixed up reasons Dad had for buying it, suddenly I was kind of glad he'd done it.